This video was brought to you in part by SD Bullion.
While some online bullion dealers continue to charge $4 over spot for U.S. Mint Silver Eagles, SD Bullion is selling 2016 Silver Eagles for just $2.29 over spot for any quantity. Again, that's just $2.29 over spot for any quantity. If you haven't joined over 25,000 new customers by making the switch to SD Bullion, what are you waiting for? You could save hundreds or even thousands of dollars on your next order. SD Bullion, the lowest prices, period.
Now moving back to the US dollar losing its world reserve currency status, this viewer is wanting to know how will the US ruling elite maintain their financial power, or what will they use as their financial tool to control part of the world under their influence if they don't have the dollar as the world reserve currency anymore?
They won't have any power, Elijah. It's that simple. All they will have left will be the U.S. military without a method to fund it outside of narcotics. Isn't that ugly? The U.S. military is running on a $700 billion or $800 billion budget, and we have a deficit that's even bigger than that. So we're not only running our economy on a credit card, we're running our predatory military on a credit card. If we lose the dollar reserve currency status, it means countries around the world will not buy automatically treasury bonds. I've asked the question to The Voice, what happens to the U.S. military after the dollar goes away? By that I mean loses its global reserve status. And he said, it's very likely to turn into a pure criminal enterprise. And it's well along that path from all of its narcotics activity. Which reminds me, back in 2014, my source Cato said to me, Jim, you know, we're going to have a real big problem with the U.S. power structure when our narcotics-funded mercenaries out of Langley find themselves doing battle against the U.S. military from the Pentagon. And we are seeing that in Syria now. The ISIS is the Langley mercenary military. They're actually run by Blackwater, both there and in Yemen. The mercenaries, they're paid by narcotics money. The narcotics comes from Afghanistan, where the U.S. military and industrial centers, you know, the military-industrial complex, made industry out of the heroin production in Afghanistan. I mean, like factories, chemical factories with tanker trucks. We're producing 1,400 tons of heroin a year out of Afghanistan. And a big issue right now in the Turkish NATO base is what happens not just to the nuclear bombs in the Turkish NATO base, but the heroin movement. And Putin of Russia, who's really not a bad guy, is trying to interfere and interrupt with the heroin flow through Turkey, because he believes that a lot of the terrorism and a lot of the ISIS and a lot of the mayhem coming from Langley has its origin from narcotics funding. So I asked The Voice what actually happened to the Nazi German industrial establishment, military establishment. And he said it became what was called the Odessa Group. And they were an arms dealer in the underworld, all over the place, all over the world, fine military equipment. And he said it's probably going to happen to the U.S. military also, because they have product to offer. All they need to do is match up with the buyers. But in the meantime, what's going to be left of the U.S. military will be largely funded by the narcotics. This is extremely ugly. I don't know how it's all going to transition, but I can assure you it's going to be very messy. I think we're going to see the U.S. military, the Pentagon, I call it the Pentagon regulars, versus the Langley mercenaries. I think the Pentagon regulars are going to back out of one theater after another, and you're already seeing it. Several months ago, we backed out of the Persian Gulf. We're no longer with a big presence in the Persian Gulf and the ocean immediately outside that along the Saudi coast. We're not there anymore. We're concentrating in pressure points, the Mediterranean and in the Baltics. We're trying to instigate Russia into taking some kind of a dumb move, and they're not doing it. They're waiting out the U.S. military so that it collapses on its own weight. Here's one of the ugliest facts I know about the U.S. military. It has a tremendously high suicide rate right now. I mean, inside the military. I'm not talking about so much retired soldiers. And what is the principal cause for suicides of active military servicemen, but homosexual rape? This is ugly stuff. This is something that's happening right now that Clinton opened up by allowing gays in the military, and our gay president Obama has just taken to the next level. It's very difficult to bring up homosexual rape charges inside the military within the court-martial, meaning the military court. Let's move on.
Moving forward to the next viewer's question. This viewer is wanting to know, this is from a German citizen, and they're wanting to know, you always say that Germany will turn to the east. As a German citizen, I'd like to ask if Germany is a sovereign state. After World War II, we have no peace treaty yet. It seems like Germany is nothing more than a U.S. colony at the moment. So I don't see that Germany will ever be allowed to become a member of that Eurasian trade zone. Your thoughts?
That is a very good question, and not just a good question, but very well stated with a firm footing. This is a smart guy asking the question. This is not a flimsy, cursory kind of question. I maintain that Germany is going to flip east. By that I mean they're going to do extensive trade with the Eastern nations in charge and dominating the Eurasian trade zone, namely Russia and China, to start with. But it's going to be more than that. I think eventually we could see Korea and Japan. I don't know how Korea and Japan will avoid the Eurasian trade zone after the U.S. falters and has trouble crawling on its knees. Okay, to begin with, I don't claim to have as much knowledge as this guy who produced the question, but I will say this. My understanding is that post-World War II, the U.S. government set up both the German political structure and its intelligence system, intelligence community, to be under Washington control and under Pentagon control. That's a very big statement. What it means is Germany is a political colony and an intelligence outpost. What's the consequence of that? The consequence, in my opinion, is that the German government, I'm going to take a leap here, but I think it's a good leap to make, and it has a lot of justification. I believe the German political and intelligence structure will eventually become irrelevant. They're going to be a government that's not listened to. They're going to be a propaganda center that just produces noise that's not paid attention to. The other side of Germany that I think will start to dominate and make more of the decisions will be their industry. I call them the industrial captains. For instance, we had the head of Siemens, which is their giant electronics company and telecommunications company, they're now realizing we can get around these Russian sanctions if we build up our Russian subsidiary so that we can then enjoy the benefits of some profits and the sale of our products inside Russia without exporting them. That's very clever. You're going to see more of it. So the industrial captains are adapting in phase one by creating an expansion of their subsidiaries. That's going to continue. Notice that through the last 2 years, there's been a violation of the Russian sanctions with respect to the German natural gas industry. They have long-term contracts with Gazprom that involve pipeline provision, supply. It also provides Nord Stream provision and supply for their LNG facilities in the north. So Germany and their energy sector has basically said, go to hell to your Berlin politicians and all your stupid rules. All right, so you have some companies, pardon me, voice is going here, it's been a while. You have German companies working on subsidiaries. You also have certain German companies that appear to be given a pass. The sanctions don't apply to the energy industry. Why is that? Because the German industrial centers would shut down without the Russian natural gas. Compromises have been made. I think we've already started to see some of the politicians, I don't mean the parliament, I mean their political leaders, start to make compromises in order to acquiesce, give in to the industrial captains. Industrial captains are saying, look, we're losing a lot of business. We're losing a lot of trade. We're losing some of our Chinese clients. We're losing jobs. We're losing profits. So this can't stand. So the politicians are making compromises that violate their U.S. masters. I prefer to call Germany a vassal state, just like Japan. So I think we're going to see very soon, moving into stage 2, where the politicians like Merkel make decisions and rules, and they're going to be ignored. And the political structure of Germany moves slowly into irrelevance. I don't know how that's going to be enforced, like violations. What will happen? Will they come down on Company X in Germany if they have some direct exports to Russia? So I think we're going to see a lot of pressure by the Germans to end the Russian sanctions. There's already pressure in France. There's pressure in a lot of different individual countries within the European Union. What I find most intriguing, though, is what's going to happen with the German intelligence and propaganda facilities. They're going overboard. And now I'm hearing from some German clients that they're largely ignored and laughed at. That what they put into the German press is stupid. And no one believes it. And they think it's dumb, and they ignore it. It's laughable. So that's going to have a consequence. I've been told by one of my smartest colleagues that he expects Merkel to announce some kind of a large controversial bailout that does not include bail-ins. So they're not going to confiscate private accounts, but they are going to give some overall big funds to rescue some big German banks. And after she makes this big declaration that'll be full of controversy and be in violation of EU rules, she's going to resign. It's going to be a very interesting transition to the second stage, where I believe the Germans are going to be at risk of having their political leadership ignored. It's very, very complex. And to add to the complexity, the largest NATO Air Force base is Ramstein, Germany. It's not just a base, it's a city. It's giant. It's not trimming down. They're closing down Spanish and Portuguese bases and sending them to Germany. Why is that? I think it's because they realize that Germany is the pivotal country. Germany's the pivotal country. I said it again. Germany's the pivotal country. And they cannot afford it to flip east. I think it's going to flip east on the industrial and commercial side and force two things. Force the Germans to end the sanctions and possibly exit the EU. And the second thing is very, very dangerous stuff. It's going to make irrelevant the NATO base. I don't know what's going to happen to the NATO base. We're going to have some very big conflicts in two countries for the NATO bases. The first is Turkey. It's happening now. The second is Germany. It's coming. Both are moving a lot of heroin.
Still on the topic of Germany, Julian Bell is wanting to know, Chancellor Merkel of Germany pushes the elite's agenda by promoting no change in migration policy, more surveillance on the German population, the deployment of the army within the borders, and disarmament of the people are also on the table, as even some politicians stated that the citizenry simply has to accept the tensioning situation and deal with it. What is there to come from these quote-unquote miraculous and totally random killing sprees? Are the people going to take the bait? How are the political betrayal and the attacks on civil liberty going to play out in Germany within the next months?
I don't know about the next months, but I think that two things are going to bring down Angela Merkel. One is the Russian sanctions. Three things. One is the Russian sanctions. Second is the bank bailouts. And the third is the Arab human garbage influx. I think Merkel is going to be forced into resignation. I'm told she wants an important post at the United Nations. And the only thing blocking her from doing it, very interesting, is that she doesn't speak English. But, why should the daughter of Hitler learn English?
Moving now to this next viewer's question. They're wanting to know about a question they say no one really has ever answered. They're wondering, when the mega corrupt banks get those billion-dollar fines, where does the money really go? Who is the beneficiary?
Well, it goes into the U.S. government coffer, where they have $1 trillion deficit. So if $5 billion comes in and $1,000 billion deficit remains, what's the net effect? Half of 1%. Who pays? The better question is, who pays? If there's a $5 billion fine for a big bank, who pays it? I don't care where it goes. It goes to the U.S. Treasury, where they've got $1 trillion deficit. So it's a drop in the bucket. Who pays it? Who pays the $5 billion fine? Well, we've had approximately $280 billion worth of fines for the Wall Street banks just in the last few years. It's all paid by shareholders. It reduces the profits for quarterly payouts, reduces the dividends. They have smaller profitability. The shareholders pay for it all. And not a single Wall Street executive has ever been charged with a felony or gone to jail. We're the exceptional nation, remember? Exceptionally corrupt.
Ron Harris is wanting to know, is there any protection of your assets in credit unions?
I'm stubborn. I believe, yes, there still is. I got a couple of angles to cite on this. Credit unions are not banks. Therefore, they're not involved with all the casino activity. They don't have derivative exposure. They don't have, say, big contracts linking the dollar to crude oil to maintain the structure of the system with respect to its foundation. They don't have that. So a credit union is much more of a true bank than the banks. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it used to be that the U.S. banks would have savers and would then have lending off the savings. But then after that, we started lending a whole lot more than we had to save because the U.S. economy had, remember, outsourced its industry in the 80s. The credit unions have a lot of savings plans and savings structure, like if it's related to a company. I was a member of the Credit Union for Digital Equipment Corporation. I used to put aside a certain amount to cover my property tax. I thought, this is good. I won't have that big pain every 3 months. I'll be ready for it. And I had about 2 or 3 properties, so I did it for all the properties, and I put aside a good amount every week. And that was, it hurt, but I never had the big shock every quarter. Okay, credit unions are more like banks than the banks. And they're more protected because they don't have a lot of the garbage casino contracts on the side. And I reasoned for a long time that therefore the credit unions will be a safer place to store your money in the event of this big system crash, because they'll still be solvent and they won't have the big ball and chain from all the derivatives. Then I got a message from a client. This doesn't destroy my premise, but it certainly puts a little bit of urination on it. Here's what the client said. I have a good friend in my corporate credit union. He's one of the board members for it. It's kind of interesting way they set up most credit unions. They don't necessarily have a president and vice president. They might, but they're not full of power and privilege and perks and lunch accounts and all that. It's a flat organization of usually 4, 5, 6, 8 people, depending on the size. And what he told me was they got a visit from the U.S. Department of Treasury at this corporate credit union. And they told them that when the big bank crash happens and they do the bank bail-ins, that they want the credit unions to comply with the same banking industry rules, but they're not forced to do so. Whoa, isn't that interesting? In other words, they want to steal people's bank accounts or portions, and they want it to be an equitable, fair, across-the-board confiscation program. Wow. I asked the guy, do you think your credit union will comply? And he said, I don't know. Depends on what kind of pressure they put on them. I said, you mean like threatening a board member's daughter? And he said, stuff like that. Because that's precisely what they do. They threaten to harm and they use bribes. They threaten to harm and they use bribes. They use both sides of the stick. I don't know. I think credit unions are safe. I don't think they're going to comply with the bail-in rules. I think they're going to say, no, we're not a bank. We don't have to do it. And we don't want an internal rebellion, because the internal rebellion will result in a quick shutdown of the credit union, because most credit unions have a community as their nucleus or a company, corporation as their nucleus. And they'll lose that nucleus that, say, Bank of America doesn't have.
Moving now to the last viewer's question from Pierre from Ottawa, Canada. He's wanting to know, could you explain what commitment of traders and open interest are? I have a basic understanding of these, but am wondering the difference between the two and how much impact they have.
Commitment of traders and open interest. Okay, commitment of traders is a tally, a summary of big commercials versus speculators and small commercials. I'm not an expert in this. I just know a little bit, and I'll share what I know. Large commercials, that might be like a car corporation, car-making corporation. So they have commitments, say, for silver. We're basically talking about gold and silver here, I believe, in the question. That's implied. Okay, so large corporations used to just hedge against their risk on future contract fulfillment. And they turned into gambling centers where they thought, well, we can make some money because we know where the market is going. That's not hedging against your future commercial commitments. Okay, so you have some categories. The large commercial companies, the small commercial companies, and your speculators. There's kind of a rule of thumb. It's more like an outcome that's well known. The small speculators get killed all the time because the large corporations have a lot more resources. They have bigger funds. They can say, well, if we just add more contracts here, we can crush those guys, and they won't be able to defend themselves. Welcome to America. Okay, most of the time the speculators lose. Most of the time the large commercials win, and that's where the banks are categorized. The big banks get slush fund help from the Fed. They go in, put added contracts, bring down the gold price, and harm the speculators who thought they had it figured out. But they just turned out to be victims for the 86th time in a row. Something has changed, though, in the last several months, and I would say just in this new year, not new anymore, but isn't it amazing? We're already into the 8th month of the new year. Time flies. We're not exactly having fun, but it certainly is stimulating to watch. I noticed a change, not just in the gold price movement in January, but in the actual tallies for the large commercials versus the speculators. It seems like the commitment of traders is more tilted toward the positive movement of gold and silver. And this is exciting. This is very nice to see. I haven't touched on open interest. Open interest, simply stated, is the number of contracts outstanding. So if you have a small open interest, you have a small number of contracts involved and a very small potential for price movement in resolving whatever contrast you have between the specs and the comms, commercials and speculators. But there's something very important that's happened in the last few months, not just since January, but the last few months. There are more long positions in gold and silver standing for delivery. And when they get delivered, the price goes up. So when we're seeing the contract settlement each month, I would say since May, the contract settlements have been positive for price movements, whereas in the past, not the case.
All right. Well, Jim, Willie, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers where they can find you and any last thoughts you had?
I don't have any last thoughts. I'm losing my voice, but I will just urge people, suggest to people, recommend to people. It would be a good idea to check out www.goldenjackass.com. I need to update the correct forecasts. The last time I worked on the correct forecast page, it was, I think, 2 years ago, and I've got another dozen correct forecasts that I need to put in there. I don't get everything right, but I do have about an 80 or 85% correct forecast rate, whereas Wall Street can boast at maybe a 15 or 20% correct forecast rate. But on goldenjackass.com website, you'll find a lot of free material, interviews like this. I kind of insist, it's not always the case, but I do an interview only if I can get a link in the public domain for my subscriber clients and followers. I don't even know how many followers there are. I think there are quite a few. For every client, there might be anywhere between 20 and 100 followers. I don't know, but I know there are a lot of people out there who follow my work, and I'm constantly told, gosh, Jim, you got a big following out there. I say, well, that's nice. I only concern myself with the clients. But anyway, there's a lot of free material on goldenjackass.com in the form of interviews and an occasional public article. I'm working on one right now, the bunker mentality of the bankers. So they're really on their last legs. Gosh, bail-ins and negative rates and infinite QE. You can't make this stuff up for more desperation. But I urge people to sign up for the Hat Trick Letter. I started in April of 2004. We had our 12th anniversary a little while ago. It's exciting. Sometimes it's exhausting, but I have my own devices for recharging my batteries and getting my energy level back and reviving myself. And I just take a few days off and just answer some of the client questions and move on, read some of the articles. But I give it a few days off. That's how you get recharged. But there are 2 reports for the Hat Trick Letter every month. It's a rare month where I have a single report. I might have a single report this month. I don't know. There's not a lot going on in finance and economics. There's a lot going on in politics and war. And mine is not a politics and war newsletter. I do mention some politics and war as it relates to finance and economics. But the 2 monthly reports are the Global Money Report and the Gold and Currency Report. They have some overlap. It's always interesting to decide on certain sections which report we'll go to. But these are fun, enjoyable decisions, and it's a labor of love. I kind of miss my statistics practice and marketing research, but it has prepared me to do this very important work. And for that, I'm grateful, and I do the best I can. And I invite people to go to the website and sign up for the newsletter. The 2 compliments that I love to hear are, I went away from the newsletter and I came back. I wish I had not. And the other one was, I've been relying on your free radio interviews, and I've only recently signed up for your newsletter, and I wish I had not delayed. Those are 2 very nice compliments to hear, and I hear them every month. I just had a subscriber sign up and said, I'm one of those who've been listening to your podcasts, your radio shows, and I just signed up because I was curious because you mentioned that, and I feel exactly the same way. I wish I'd signed up a year ago. So it's an interesting newsletter. It's got some unique material. I got some really good sources, but I've got a very valued, smart as the dickens group of colleagues, a group of 10. Not too much fools us. I might make a dumb premise, put forth a dumb premise, and it'll get shot down by a couple of my colleagues, and I'll say, oh, okay, I see it better now. So I avoid mistakes because of my colleagues, and they bring some forecast to the table, my colleagues do. So I think I've got a very valuable newsletter, and I invite people to check it out.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for your time.
Okay. Thanks, Elijah. It was a pleasure being on. I really enjoy listener questions. I think they bring a lot of value because they come from all the different corners from perspectives.
This video was brought to you in part by ReluctantPreppers.com.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. Click here to subscribe for free to ReluctantPreppers.com.